Late last week, tens of thousands of migrants swam from Morocco to Ceuta, a North African exclave of Spain. The episode provoked some pretty conceitful reactions from Spain's geopolitical adversaries. Israel's UN envoy, for instance, suggested that Spain should stop lecturing Israel, while US Vice President J.D. Vance claimed the episode was a symptom of radical left-wing globalism. But it also provoked some conspicuously sharp reactions from Spain's nominal allies, with a number of EU countries calling on Spain to be suspended from the Schengen area, which guarantees free movement and borderless travel within most of the EU. So, in this video, we're going to have a look at what happened in Ceuta, and whether it spells the beginning of the end for Schengen. Which country has the world's best flag? It's not an important question, certainly not as important as the topic of this video, but we still want an answer. So we set up a survey that lets you vote for your favourite flag in a bunch of random matchups. It's actually really fun. Voting closes this Friday and is linked in the description. So let's just start by explaining what's happened over the past couple of days. This story really kicked off last Thursday, when something like 60,000 migrants breached the border between Morocco and Ceuta. For context, Ceuta is an autonomous city of Spain on the North African coast, and one of the two Spanish exclaves in Africa, the other being Melilla, with both bordering Morocco. It's been the subject of a long-standing territorial dispute between Spain and Morocco, with Morocco arguing that both Ceuta and Melilla are colonial remnants that should naturally be part of Morocco, and Spain arguing that Ceuta has been under continuous Spanish administration since at least the mid-1600s, well before the creation of the modern Moroccan state. Anyway, usually border control between Morocco and Ceuta is pretty tight, but on Thursday, tens of thousands of migrants were able to reach the territory by essentially swimming around the breakwater on the southernmost point of the territory, although at least 70 people drowned in the process. Spain promptly deployed the army to restore order and was able to push most migrants back to Morocco, but the events and the associated scenes on social media provoked a panicked reaction from other leaders in the EU. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni immediately demanded Spain's suspension from the Schengen zone, which is supposed to guarantee free movement and borderless travel between 29 European countries, namely the EU's 27 member states minus Ireland and Cyprus, plus Norway, Iceland, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Meloni was then backed up by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who's also somewhat of a hardliner when it comes to immigration, and the two countries then organised a letter signed by another 20 member states calling for an emergency meeting to, quote, restore effective control of the union's external borders. In the letter, the signatories linked what happened in Ceuta to Spain's relatively liberal immigration policies, arguing that Spain's recent migrant regularisation programme acted as a, quote, pull factor. For context, Spain has periodically introduced regularisation programmes for its irregular migrant population. The most recent one was announced earlier this year, offering a one-year residence and work permit to irregular migrants, and attracted over 1 million applicants, more than double the expected number. It's perhaps worth mentioning in this context that Sanchez currently isn't too popular with his European counterparts, in part because they don't like his immigration policies, but also because there's a sense that Sanchez's outspoken interventions, especially on foreign policy, are making it harder for the rest of the EU to come up with a united front. Anyway, the letter provoked a furious reaction from Sanchez, who argued that the main driver of what happened in Ceuta was not liberal regularisation policies in the mainland, but rather a ruling by the Spanish Supreme Court from June the 29th, stating that Spanish authorities could not summarily deport migrants who arrived by sea, because they did not cross the physical border infrastructure referenced in Spanish law. Sanchez and other Spanish officials argue that the ruling was essentially misrepresented on social media by human trafficking networks in Morocco, which gave migrants the, apparently misplaced impression that they wouldn't be returned. Sanchez reacted with his own letter to the Commission, calling for more European unity, noting what he described as the rather asymmetric response from other member states, given that Spain lets fewer irregular migrants into the EU than Italy does. Anyway, this row has provoked some anxiety that, especially if Italy continues to impose controls on its border with Spain, which were introduced over the weekend, we might be watching the beginning of the end of Schengen. So, will Ceuta break Schengen? Well, by itself, it really shouldn't. For starters, it's worth noting that Ceuta isn't actually part of Schengen anyway, and Spain insists that 0 of the migrants that swam across last week have made it to the mainland, and that there was never really any risk of them doing so. On the contrary, the vast majority have already been returned, thanks in large part to some rather muscular techniques deployed by the Spanish army, which have actually invited admiration from the British right. Furthermore, there's now some evidence to suggest that this was at least in part organised by the Moroccan state. According to the New York Times, for instance, several migrants said in interviews that police officers waved them through, allowing them to overwhelm Spain's border fence with relative ease. It also took the Moroccan government a conspicuously long time to respond, with no public statement until Monday. This might sound almost conspiratorial, and it is worth mentioning that Sanchez himself has avoided criticising the Moroccan state directly, but it's also worth mentioning that Morocco has form here. In 2021, for instance, the Moroccan government pulled a similar trick by deliberately loosening border controls around Ceuta to essentially get back at Spain over a diplomatic rift over Western Sahara. Anyway, if what happened in Ceuta was indeed at least partly engineered by the Moroccan state, as opposed to being a natural consequence of Spain's relatively liberal immigration policies, which is what Maloney originally implied, then it's in the EU's interest to put up a united front in order to deter Morocco from trying a similar trick in the future. The point we're trying to make is that, in retrospect, it looks like other EU leaders slightly jumped the gun. And what happened in Ceuta itself shouldn't really put additional pressure on Schengen. Even still, this whole episode has acted as a reminder of the pre-existing and really quite fundamental strains that Schengen is under at the moment. In short, Schengen only really works if member states have similar immigration policies. There's not much point in Italy, for instance, having a hyper-restrictive immigration policy if Spain is pursuing a hyper-liberal one. Because, under Schengen, which implies zero border controls between member states, newly arrived immigrants to Spain could just flow straight into Italy if they wanted. This has always been the fundamental tension within Schengen, but as evidenced by growing frequency with which member states are reimposing border controls, it's become more acute as immigration has become a more salient issue, and as national immigration policies have diverged. The autumn issue of our magazine Too Long is now available for pre-order. The main story inside is all about the plan to fix Europe. From the economy and trade to politics and war, we discuss the various ways in which Europe could be reborn. Then there's the global section, which includes our interview with The Economist's Washington bureau chief about the state of America. There's also articles on the current state of US-China relations, as well as discussing the politics of disasters, the Pope's involvement in 21st century politics, and the death of the dollar. Our EU section includes the latest from the war in Ukraine, how Germany's rearmament could defend Europe, as well as stories from across the continent. Our UK section unpacks Britain's new Prime Minister, as well as the various rumbling issues from Brexit, some 10 years on, that still plagued Burnham. That's just some of the stories in this issue, with us also launching a brand new business section to go alongside the relaunch of TLDR Business YouTube channel later this month. If you're interested in hearing our takes on all of those topics, then you can get the very best deal by subscribing to Too Long. Subscribers get 20% off every issue as long as they're subscribed, but if you use code AUGUST26, you'll get an additional £3 off your first copy. Plus, if you want the most from TLDR, then you can also subscribe to Too Long and TLDR Party in one bundle, the cheapest way to get both subscriptions. Regardless, thank you so much for watching this video and for supporting TLDR.